John, thanks so much for being on the program today. I've got to say, I was very taken with your book, The Good Investor: How Your Work Can Confront Injustice, Love Your Neighbor, and Bring Healing to the World. I've read a lot of stuff on this. As I shared with you before we turned the recording on, I used to work with Rusty Leonard. Rusty and Carol Leonard are still on my board here at MinistryWatch, so I've had a long association with him and feel like I've read a lot of stuff about, sort of the um, uh, business as mission, biblically responsible investing, vocation and calling as it relates to work. I read a lot of stuff on this topic, and your book is absolutely one of the best. So thank you so much for this book and for being on the program today.
Thank you, Warren. I am such a fan of Rusty myself. When we started Eventide back in 2008, Rusty and I connected, and he was such a mentor and support, and even made the BRI Institute available to me for free to help me in the early years. So I'm just so thankful to Rusty, to BRI Institute, and to Ministry Watch.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I did notice in your book, in the acknowledgments, you mentioned Rusty by name. You thanked him, and I was gratified to see that. Yeah, Rusty is sort of one of the unsung heroes in a lot of movements. That he's was there at the founding of Kingdom Advisors. He was there at the founding of course, BRI, Biblically Responsible Investing, one of the pioneers, as you mentioned in your book. And of course, he is the founder. He and his wife Carol were the founders of MinistryWatch. So, but moving along to your book, Robin, and speaking of personal stories, and as we did with Rusty, I think your personal story, which you started your book with, and you sort of wove your story throughout the book, is such an integral part of the book that I don't see how we can dig into a lot of the principles here without you talking about it. So tell us about your birth and upbringing, your background, and kind of what got you to the point where you founded Eventide.
I was born in a small village in southern India called Kangara, and it's within a state called Kerala, a very Christian state in India, even though India only has 2 or 3% Christianity rate. I lived in a house with my grandparents. My grandfather was a pastor. My grandmother, what I saw was prayer all the time. And growing up, I learned scripture in a language called Malayalam. Late nights, the electricity would go off. And so all we did is sing songs and pray and talk. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. My dad was from the Middle East working, and my mom and my siblings lived with my dad's parents. So for me, growing up, faith was like always important. And I saw faithfulness and generosity. If I looked outside my window, what I saw was the cemetery, because my grandfather donated our backyard to the church. So that had a huge impact on me growing up. I've always wanted to be a person that served and loved God through my life.
Well, I've been to Kerala, and it's a beautiful part of India. And so whenever I found out that you were from Kerala, my eyes kind of lit up a little bit because I could visualize the place. And I am curious, and I know I want to move on from this part of your story, but when I was in Kerala, I did notice that there were a lot of Christians. I've heard numbers as high as 25 or 30% of the state of Kerala are Christians, but a lot of them are Catholic. Were you among the few, you and your family, among the few Protestants, or was there a sizable evangelical/Protestant community there?
The Protestant community has gotten bigger over the past 50 years. So there's a church called the Marthoma Church, which is similar to the Presbyterian Church here in America. And the legacy of the Marthoma Church goes back 2,000 years. The St. Thomas was supposedly in India. And so my grandparents were coming out of the Marthoma Church. And very early in their marriage, my grandfather was 17 and my grandmother was 14 when they
Wow.
got married. And it was all arranged back then. Even my parents were arranged. And, they, came to the Pentecostal faith. And as Pentecostals in India, it's even more it's similar to the holiness movement in America. Uh, Imagine coupling the holiness movement with the charismatic movement. That's what the Pentecostal movement in India was
Right.
when I was growing up.
Well, that's fascinating. So, what brought you to the United States? How did you go from Kerala and you know the so that would be on the southwestern part of India, and I guess they believe that St. Thomas ended up in Chennai, which is on the southeastern part of India,
Northeastern,
so
yes.
right down there in the kind of together southern part of India. But how did you end up in the United States?
My dad's older brother, my dad has four brothers, two older brothers. So one of his older brothers was the minister at Tremont Temple Baptist Church here in Boston. He was an international minister there. And it's a historic church here in Boston. And he applied for my family for the visa to move to the US before I was born in the 1970s. I was born in 1980. And in 1988, my family moved here together. And that was the first opportunity for me to actually get to know my dad. Up to that point, I saw him maybe once a year because he worked in the Middle East and we lived in India.
So you ended up in Boston, and is that I'm assuming, I mean, that could not be a defining seminal moment in your life and your family's life. Can you say a little bit more about that? What did moving to Boston from India open up for you or change for you?
A lot. So when I was in India, I felt like I belonged in a way, even though in my school, of course, we have Hindus and Muslims and Christians and different types of Christians. And but when I moved to the US, I really started to understand, even as a kid, what it felt to not conform to the patterns of the world, as Romans 12 talks about. And I've kind of taken that with myself throughout my life ever since. I remember in 2008, we started Eventide and I got married, and my wife was studying at UT Tyler. I remember when I would drive between Dallas and Tyler, stopping at some of the gas stations and thinking, I think I might be the first Indian person some of these people are seeing. So, so even as a kid, growing up in Medford, it was all Italian and Irish. And I was definitely the first Indian kid, Indian family that a lot of young people were seeing back then. And so, we got picked on, back then, shows like Simpsons with Apu, Married with Children with Habib. All of these shows were popular. So I heard all the jokes and all the names. And um, so at the same time, I think that strengthened my faith because I felt like an outsider, but that also helped me to not identify as a non-Christian with my non-Christian friends. I always saw myself as being different and as being almost an ambassador, not just for India, but also for God, because I just always felt like I was different growing up as a kid in Medford.
Well, and I don't mean to be stereotypical, but since you mentioned that that in Texas you may have been the only Indian person that some of your neighbors had ever seen, I would also maybe put a friendly amendment on that, except possibly for the hardworking Indians that themselves were, entrepreneurs and small business owners and that sort of thing. And I am wondering if both how your Indian heritage and the work ethic of your family and translated into your life and career, both maybe beginning with your academic career, but then in your work career, and how it informed your theology of work, which you talk about in your book. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll try to summarize. First of all, if you grow up in an Indian family, uh, especially I think in the immigrant context, you learn a lot. You learn hard work, you learn resourcefulness, you learn what it means to be generous while also saving. So my father, every Friday, if we that's the one day he would take me and my brother out, and we would go to a Burger King, he would get a coupon, buy one, get one free. And he would sit there and watch my brother and me eat a double Whopper. And I'm amazed, he was bagging groceries at Purity Supreme, a grocery store. I'm amazed how much he saved and how he was able to buy a 3-family house while also being generous and charitable. And this is something I've seen with, Indian immigrants in America. There is a sense of hard work, resourcefulness, saving, grit, resiliency. Uh, at the same time, I would say that I think my father and my mother probably struggled to understand risk. So they probably took the safer options. And as I was starting a business, we didn't have a lot of entrepreneurs in our family. My parents pushed my sister to go into the healthcare field, and that's generally how it was in my family: is take the easy job, whether it's the nurse, the engineer, the computer programmer, something where you have a job.
Yep.
And so risk taking wasn't really encouraged in our context. Uh, that's probably different than some of the North Indian, Gujarati kind of store owners that you referenced earlier. But South Indians, Christians generally don't do that. We're generally just take a job and be safe. But that said, for me, the idea of risk changed drastically as I started to uncover and discover my calling. And risk, just that framework changed for me as I started to pray and wait on God about what I should do with my life.
Well, can you say more about that, Robin? I mean, how did risk taking, your understanding of risk change during that season? And what was that season of like? So we've kind of skipped over a lot. I mean, you finished high school, um, and tell everybody where you went to college.
I went to college at a school called Tufts University. I studied economics, and I took a job the first job I got at a large custody bank. And they asked me if I wanted to help them with outsourcing in India. I went to India for a year, and that started opening my eyes to just what is my purpose. I saw how the cook and the housekeeper were being treated, how they didn't have a bed to sleep on. They were sleeping on a concrete floor behind the kitchen when I had a brand new bed and an air conditioner. And it really started, opening questions for me in my own heart about what is the type of a person I want to be? What is the kind of work I want to be doing? I don't want to exploit others for my own profit or for the profit of my employer. I want to live a life that loves and uplifts others. And ended up leaving that job, taking another job, getting fired from the other job. And that's what led me to spending a few months in prayer and fasting with Finney, the co-founder of Eventide. Finney and I had started a house church together, and I asked Finney, will you pray with me once a week? And can we fast together? So that's how the concept of Eventide and honoring God through our work started. So in terms of risk taking, uh, I think I had lost my job. So this idea of losing, um, I think a lot of people, when they think about risk, they think about losing money. And, when you have already lost a job, at that point, the way that I started to think was, I want to honor God. And I want to lean into however I could honor God. And I started taking classes at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and really asking God to call me into ministry. And I had the sacred secular mindset. And as I started to pray, I realized, the biggest risk I could take is not taking a risk here. I don't want to live a life that's just 9 to 5 and just making a paycheck and then looking back at the end of my life and saying, man, I really didn't do something with boldness for God when I had the opportunity. So at that point, like, I started to understand that probably the biggest risk I could take right now is not taking the risk at all. And I want to take risks, that promote human flourishing. I want to take risks that advance God's kingdom, risks that promote the love of neighbor. Um, if I'm simply thinking about risk in terms of my own upside and downside, then probably I would be happy with a 9 to 5 job, right? But when I started to think about risk holistically, about how I could use my life to love my neighbor, my risk framework changed.
I mean, you said so much there that I could probably unpack for the next 2 or 3 hours with you. But one of the things that I did want to, pause on for just an extra moment was this experience that you had in India. After you graduated from college, you went back to India for a year, and you very politely did not name the organization that you were working for, but it's a global multinational organization that would be a name familiar to many. And whenever you got to India and you were living in, uh, at least by Indian standards, luxury, certainly comfort, and you were seeing that the people that were serving you were living in squalor side by side with you. You actually in you raised your voice. You said, "Hey, can we do something about this?" And you were essentially shut down in that effort. And I found that to be a very poignant story because um, I think at some level, all of us kind of know that there are people in the world that don't live in the relative luxury that we live in, and we all want to speak up, or maybe we tell ourselves that we would speak up if we were in those similar circumstances. But what that story told me was just how um, strong the system is and how difficult it is. I mean, to change the system, and being one voice is important. But I could easily see how that experience would inform you in forming Eventide, because I mean, one of the key ideas of Eventide is that my $1,000 investment um, might not be doing a lot for good or a lot for evil, but my $1,000 investment combined with hundreds of thousands or millions of other people really is either perpetuating the system or changing the system. Do I have that right?
That's absolutely right. And ultimately, it's easy for all of us, myself, to conform to the systems and the patterns of the world, especially when we start living inside of it. Uh, even during that 1 year in India, I remember, so I grew up in a small village in Kerala. I had not seen Bombay, Mumbai, or the big cities of India, Kolkata. When I went back to India, I couldn't believe it when I saw like old people sitting on the side of the road, like this is the end of their lives, just suffering. I'm thinking, man, like no relief at all, even at the end of somebody's life. And I saw, lame people crawling around, and you could see their knees are bloody and no wheelchairs. You see children who are made blind by, it's like the Oliver Twist, David Copperfield story. Uh, and, but then I noticed after living there for 6 months, and you're driving on an auto rickshaw or you're driving in a car, and these kids come up to you, you almost get used to it. Like it's like that initial shock that you felt kind of goes away because it's like, okay, this is just part of the system here. And it's so easy for us to conform to the patterns of the world. And as Christians, we have to keep praying that does not happen. And when it comes to investing, Americans are very much conforming to the patterns of the world. And, Rusty, Leonard, myself, and many others are speaking out, but I don't think the average Christian is seeing the problem because they're so entwined in it. And they don't understand that they're actually partnering with real companies that are exploiting children through tobacco, exploiting young women through pornography, um, exploiting young men through online gambling and sports betting. And we're profiting. Every time we look at the statements of our investment statements, we are rooting for these companies to grow and to do more of what they do, because we're not rooting for our statement balances to get smaller. We're rooting for our statement balances to get bigger. And if you're investing in the S&P 500, Based on Eventide screens, 60% of the S&P 500 is screened out. That means that we think there's major problems in 60% of these companies that Christians should avoid investing in.
Robin, I think that what you just said might fall on deaf ears with some if they don't understand a really important underlying principle that I would like for you to say a little bit more about. And that is this principle of stock ownership really is company ownership. In other words, we kind of think of, our 401k or our mutual funds in the abstract, that I own a, I don't know, a Schwab, global fund or whatever it might be. We don't really realize that what we really own are small pieces of these companies that you are telling me, and I know to be true, are doing bad things in the world, and that we've got to be knowledgeable and intentional, or we're going to be we're going to be feeding the beast, so to speak. We're going to be funding the evil that we say we oppose in the world. Am I getting you right in that?
Yes, you are. I think the system has a way of blinding us to the truth. If you are investing if you have a 401k, or the listener might have a 401k, they might think, oh yeah, I have some target date fund with American funds. Okay, what is in the target date funds? It'll be many, probably fund of funds. What is in the fund of funds? It'll be other mutual funds or ETFs. Then you have to look under that and say, okay, what are the holdings of these mutual funds and ETFs? I promise you'll find tobacco, you will find abortion, you will find pornography, you'll find gambling, you'll find a lot of these things that you are profiting from because the money is being stewarded by people that don't share biblical values. So we're outsourcing our money and the management of our money to people that don't share our values. So that is the major issue that I'm seeing in the church and in the stock market.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's just stipulate for the record that we should stop doing that. We should invest our money with Eventide or with Rusty Leonard at Stewardship Partners, or maybe Art Alley at the Timothy Fund, or whatever it might be. For some, that's going to be just me saying that on a podcast, or you saying that on the podcast. It's going to be, shall we say, unconvincing. I mean, they might feel, okay, I hear you, but man, oh man, I've been, investing for years. I've got, all these kind of this system in place. I get my statements. I wouldn't even know how to move my 401k to another provider. I mean, it's a heavy lift. So to that person who is, either in the beginning stages of trying to, maybe just now becoming familiar with this concept of biblically responsible investing, what would you recommend to them, Robin, as a couple of early first steps? I mean, is there something they should, other than your book, something they should read, something they should think about? Are there any key ideas that maybe you think have made a difference with other people that they should consider?
Yeah, I would encourage a few things. Getting started is the hardest part because, again, a lot of our listeners have financial advisors that they would hope would do this for them, but the financial advisor is probably not equipped to support them for various reasons. So a couple of tools and resources. One is if they go to goodinvestor.com, so www.goodinvestor.com, there are two tools on there. One of the tools allows them to put in their current portfolio into a screener. So they could put in the ticker symbols or the name of the fund, and they could see what are they investing in. Rusty Leonard also has this. They could go to briinstitute.com. And then they could put in the ticker symbol and really understand some of the problems in their portfolio. The other tool on the goodinvestor.com, so it's just goodinvestor.com, www.goodinvestor.com, is a find an advisor tool. So there we have made a list of advisors that have gone through a 9-hour curriculum with Eventide. They're also certified kingdom advisors, and they are committed to supporting their clients with values conversations. So we have made a list of financial advisors that they could connect with in their own state, in their own territory, and hopefully get the support that they need.
Yeah. Well, and Robin, I think this is so important because as Christians, we are called to be stewards. We are not owners. It's not our money, right? It's God's money. And if we embrace that idea of being stewards, and then we maybe take it one step further and say, okay, well, what precisely am I a steward of? Well, there at least in terms of the financial side of things, there is, of course, the money we give, and we should be wise givers. And I hope MinistryWatch will help many people do that. We rate ministries, and we try to encourage wise, discerning giving. But the reality is that's the smallest bucket of money that most of us manage. The much larger bucket of money is our assets, our investment portfolio. And if we can be doing things, just really beautifully well in the philanthropy category, and we could undo all that good by not being wise and prudent in the asset investment category. And I think that that's really something that a lot of Christians can't get their arms around these days.
Yeah, John Wesley preached, make all you can to give all you can, but make all you can without hurting yourself or your neighbor in body or in soul. So we have to consider both sides, right? I think often today the pastor preaches only make all you can to give all you can. And the Bible, Deuteronomy 23:18 says, not to bring the earnings of a male or female prostitute into the temple to pay any vow, for this is an abomination to the Lord. Judas in the New Testament, when he tries to give the blood money to the temple, the high priest don't take it. So we see this principle throughout the Bible. God does care. I think stewardship should be holistic. Every decision we make should come from this framework that God owns it all, that everything belongs to God, including our lives, including the places we choose to work at. If there's a young person listening and maybe they're having a tension, maybe they feel God is calling them to become a teacher, and yet they could make a lot of money as a financial advisor or investment banker. Maybe that generosity decision starts with becoming that teacher in order to serve the young children in the community. So it's not just about how much money do you amass and then give away.
Right. In fact, you talk in your book about human flourishing a great deal. That our investing should be, number one, businesses that you'd be proud to own, and you should invest in ways that practice the great commandments, which is to love God and love our neighbor. So those, in many ways, with those two principles in mind, I mean, there are others that you talk about in the book, but I could see someone stopping right there, and it would have a radical impact on the way they give, on the way they invest, in the manner in which they earn their money themselves. Robin, we're going to have to bring our conversation here to a close quickly, but before we do, I'd like to ask you a question that I often ask people whenever I'm at the end of a conversation, which is there some idea that I'm just not smart enough to ask, that you want to absolutely make sure that you share with our audience today? Or if not, I mean, if we've kind of covered everything, is there one idea that you'd like to put an exclamation mark behind? An idea? Yeah, we talked about it, but we talked about a lot of things today, and I want to make sure that this one idea doesn't get lost in all of the things that we talked about.
Yeah, you touched on it. It's this idea that God owns it all. And if we are not the owners and we are the stewards, how should we steward God's resources? how should we steward our own lives, our bodies, our families, if God owns it all? I think too often the Christian person has the sacred secular mindset. It's like some things belong to God and some things don't. And our work, our investing generally falls in the secular camp where God doesn't really care. But in fact, God does care. We have to bring our entire lives into stewardship and under the will of God.
Bob and John, thank you so much. I really found your book nourishing. I found this conversation helpful, and I hope our listeners and viewers will as well. Thanks again for being on the program.
Thank you, Warren.